I just want to thank you for coming on, Alasdair. And the reason for the call is because as an accountant, I tend to be at the coal face more than an HR advisor. And I'm getting consistently the same questions from clients that probably to you would be quite simple and straightforward, and you're probably repeating 1,000 times anyway. So I just want to do a quick video for the questions I'm getting from clients. And I think furlough for me is the word that describes COVID-19. And when someone says, how would you describe the coronavirus in 20 years' time? Mine will be furlough and not really knowing what to do and flying by the seat of your pants as the legislation comes out, so to speak. And I think a lot of employers, and I might be wrong, seem to lose sight of the fact that this scheme was designed for employers to protect jobs and not the emotions that are getting involved with the decision making at the moment. And it's also, and I don't know whether you think I'm wrong here, because it's so loose, it is open to misabuse and misclaim. And I think I saw this week that there was 1,868 reports of fraudulent claims at the 29th of May. And that's only going to increase as the sort of people that are on furlough and off furlough and it's not fair situation is going to come through. So I just think the purpose of this video is really to hone in on the employers and sort of making decisions that they need to make now straight away, rather than keep putting things further down the line and putting it off, if that makes sense. So the first thing I want to talk to you, Alasdair, if that's okay, is about while people are on furlough leave. So one of the biggest concerns employers have got is their employees are accruing holiday pay while they're off, and they're a bit concerned about this holidays entitlements accruing. When they get back to business, they want to get back to business, and they don't want to have 1,001 holiday requests. So can the employers force the employee to take holiday leave while they're off? And is it just a case of topping up the 20%, or do they have to pay the 100%? And so how would that work, I suppose, is the question.
Yeah. Well, hi, Carrie. Certainly since Easter, we've been advising clients that they need to consider enforcing employees for taking holiday during furlough, once it became clear that was possible to do. And as I say, when furlough was brought in, it was made clear that all other existing employment laws still applied. So you basically, as an employer, give somebody twice the length of notice of the period of holiday that you wish them to take. And you can require them to take holiday. The fact that they can't go anywhere to use it is the nature of it. But certainly a lot of employers increasingly are concerned about, when they come back to the new norm, whatever that might be, that they don't want a mad clamour for holidays in July, August, September to get the last vestiges of a British summer or a Mediterranean package holiday if we don't spend it in a hotel on quarantine. So yes, you can require your employees to take holiday whilst on furlough. We've done a lot of letters for employers to do just that. And yes, obviously holiday pay needs to be paid at 100%. What I am seeing is some employers, not my clients, I might add, but I've seen just recently a company in London had been, at a very early stage, had been essentially stating to employees as they went on furlough that they will be taking their holidays whilst on furlough, however long that scheme might last. And it seems to me that if they've been putting holiday pay down, they've been putting it down at 80% and claiming it all back. So that's certainly not something that I would encourage. I think that's something that HMRC would want to come back and look at. But in essence, yes, it's good practice to ensure that your employees take leave. You can carry some forward, but to be honest, I think you're as well as a business to grasp the nettle now and do that.
Because otherwise
before people come back.
Yeah, because otherwise they're going to end up with everybody wanting to be on holiday. So if I
Absolutely.
wanted my staff, and I'm not going to make them do this, but if I wanted them to take a week's holiday, I just realistically need to give them 2 weeks notice.
You need to give them a fortnight's notice.
Yeah. Okay, no, perfect. And then I think another thing that employers often forget is that staff can undertake training while they're on furlough leave. And so, I mean, for me, for example, I mean, I haven't furloughed any of my staff, but some accountants have. So, for example, there's continuing professional development requirements. There's nothing stopping the staff doing that. The only thing that I can see is they just need to ensure they're being paid minimum wage while they're getting their training. Is that correct, or am I?
Well, that's right, Carrie. I think that's something that a lot of employers who have, if they have been requiring staff to undertake training, probably missed. I think in practice, if somebody's on furlough at 80%, they're probably going to be okay in that regard. But yes, they obviously training for occupational purposes is classed as working time. So if there is a risk that somebody who is maybe already on something hovering over minimum wage, yes, you would need to top that up, certainly. Yeah,
definitely. And also I think, like, for me, for clients, they're spending a lot of time sort of reviewing systems and processes, and actually it's kind of a way of keeping the employees in touch as well, because if they're looking at a new computer system, for example, okay, they can't do anything to generate new revenue for the business, but they could undertake the online training on the system. So when they're back, they can immediately help make improvements. Because I do think, again, another thing that seems to get forgotten is keeping, I know you can't take work calls and things like that on your furlough, but keeping in touch with them and motivating the team.
Yeah, no, it's true. I think employers have a duty of care to their employees' mental well-being as well, in circumstances if you've got staff actually furloughed at present, and if they've been furloughed since March, it's not all binge watching Netflix and drinking too much and thinking it's Christmas. It's such a long time now. I think any kind of contact through this period is a good thing, so long as it's not work, as you say. I think it's important for people's mental well-being, and I think there's also now there must be a huge amount of anxiety for those still on furlough, especially increasingly as businesses in certain sectors at least have some staff back from furlough and others not. The ones who are not back will be very concerned about their job security.
And as an employer, you're better doing that, because then you get more staff buy-in long term as well. Because at the end of the day, there are headaches involved with this, but ultimately, if you've got good staff that work hard, they're a great asset to the company. You need to keep them on board, and
very much so. I think that in previous recessions, sometimes employers were quick to get rid of talent without exploring alternatives, and they suffered a few years down the line in the good times because they had lost good staff. Maybe they hadn't invested in training, and it is important to think twice before you cut that talent. There might be other things you can do. I've found that in the last 4 months that most employers' staff have been pretty understanding of the situation that the world is in, and that their employer is in. So look at whether staff will wear a 20% cut in pay temporarily, at least across the board, as an alternative to losing 15-20% of the workforce. Do your sums and look to see if there's any alternative short of cutting. I mean, there's going to be a lot of redundancies. It's starting, but and yes, most employers, once they've got 30 plus staff, you can usually weed the garden and find 10% of a business that possibly you could manage without. But I think it's important to take your time and look very carefully at your resourcing requirements and try and keep the talent.
it's the cost of recruiting again, because I know recruitment
Mm.
agents won't like this statement, but it's the time involved in interviewing, it's the fee that you have to pay to recruiters as well, and also it's the lost time of training once a new staff gets on board. I think a client of mine said you need to give 3 months for a staff to be fully effective minimum, so you've got to think of all those factors.
Yeah, I mean, each post, I mean, they do reckon it costs about 25 grand in lost productivity and recruitment costs and things per employee. There's some truth in that, undoubtedly. You can't evaluate somebody until they've been in the job long enough to be properly measured. And that's assuming you've got good induction procedures and do all the right things.
So initially, we all thought this scheme would only be open for 3 months, and employers have made the decision in some cases to pay staff 100% off pay. Now, as COVID-19 unfortunately is going on longer than anyone anticipated, where some employers are concerned is where they've topped up wages by 20% and they've kind of set a precedent. So if they come to the point that, I mean, some employees, they've got their businesses closed, they've got rent to pay, they've got other bills to go out. So where do they stand if they want to stop paying the staff that voluntary 20%?
Well, firstly, you have to look at the contract. It's a contractual issue. If they've committed to it, then there's going to be an element of risk there. But you can, with something like that, like when people were putting staff on for that week or so before furlough came in, a lot of companies were pushing through temporary layoff provisions in contracts and temporary pay reductions and short-time working provisions. And employees took it, they accepted the situation. As we've seen over time, where companies have brought some staff back, it's been acknowledged as being unfair if somebody's working, that they're not getting any more than those that are sat at home not having to. So from the point of view of staff morale, a lot of employees address that anyway. But my view is whilst I think you have to look at each individual case on its facts, says he with a disclaimer, but rather than run the delay, the risk of the delay of formal consultation, I'd say it's a temporary measure and just do it. The fact is, staff are going to acquiesce to it in the vast majority of cases. So just do it. Chances are you've not made a permanent change to your terms and conditions anyway. If all you've done is essentially fill out the kind of examples of furlough leave variation letters that were going around at the time or that people were drafting, then there's every likelihood that the furlough leave letter will actually say we're taking advantage of the government scheme. It doesn't make a permanent change. So I think it's not been long enough for custom and practice to insist that you pay it. So just do it. I think the risk of delaying to do the niceties of consultation and give staff notice of the change if you have to contractually because they resist, you're looking at 6-8 weeks, which is a critical time at the moment for cash flow.
Because some people,
just do it. It's the lesser of the evils. I think most staff will accept that it has been exactly that. It's a lot longer than anticipated, and 20%. The fuel bills they're saving at the moment are probably doing something towards that.
A big one for me is, just because of the nature of some of my clients, is maternity leave. So I've had employees that are on maternity leave and weren't necessarily due back for 3 or 4 months, and then all of a sudden the employees come back and said they want to return to work early and to go on furlough leave. Now, where do they stand with that? Because my limited understanding is they're on maternity leave.
Good news for those. I mean, before yesterday, my advice was end the maternity leave early by agreement, and then you could furlough. Now, and of course, with the deadline of today, it's the 10th, the deadline today, that for first time furlough people, then that has been becoming an increasing query. And actually, as of yesterday, however, now there's new government guidance on that, and it says that provided that the employer has used the furlough scheme prior to the 10th of June, then returning maternity staff can still be furloughed for the first time if their maternity comes to an end after the 10th.
Yeah.
So at the moment, as it stands, as of yesterday, that's now been clarified by the government, and that's permissible.
Yeah.
So so good question.
Yeah.
Given the time.
No,
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
We are recording this on the 10th of June, which is D-Day for furlough, isn't it? Okay, so when staff return to work, so businesses are going to open up, well, they are opening up, but they're not opening up to full capacity. So they're only going to need part of their workforce back. Now, yes, part-time furloughs coming in, but if they decide that they only need, say, 30% of the workforce back initially, are there any HR issues with deciding who to bring back as off of furlough? You know, obviously a big one will be childcare, but you know, if you've got 3 people that all have children at home and you need one of them back, you obviously can't put them on a rota. So would there be any sort of ramifications further down the line of choosing one, or how should they do it?
Well, I mean, it's of course this has been an issue for some months with companies who've been bringing some people back and leaving others on furlough for some time. You, as an employer, you need to have your A team if they're available, and you would have, best practice would have been to look at a selection criteria, a bit like you might in the context of a redundancy consultation process. So follow that criteria. Now, whereas with redundancy, you wouldn't look at things like, obviously discriminatory things like childcare provision, but with furlough, I think it's permissible that you can. You could seek volunteers to remain on furlough. There might be some who still shielding themselves or other family members. So I think the criteria can extend to that. But I think also, I think again, the key is what's commercially right for the business. You know, I think again, as I've mentioned before, those on furlough might be getting increasingly anxious as the workforce comes back, and it's important that when an employer, if they do have to start making difficult decisions about redundancies, they look at the criteria and change it and make sure that, whereas before they perhaps didn't consult on it, that they do, and they make sure that staff are aware of the criteria chosen, exclude the discriminatory angles that might exist around childcare, for example, and get that agreement. Childcare is a thorny one because, again, at the moment there are very few year groups back at school. Childcare will still proportionately fall on women more than men. That's still very much the nature of it. Emergency family independent leave provisions are effective enough. I think they would provide the protection from dismissal at the moment. But of course, as an employer, you're not obliged to pay. So where you can, leave them on furlough. It's increasingly the case that employers are saying, well, that role isn't furloughed, I need that person back, and try and accommodate them. But I think dismissals at the moment for it would be a huge no.
I think people are forgetting now there's a commercial decision to make as well as a sort of practical one, isn't there? Just because businesses are in financial dire straits and they just need to get back on with the job, don't they?
Very much so.
So if an employer is, they decide they need to bring 3 members of staff back, they've identified those 3 members of staff, how much notice do they need to give staff to come back to work ideally?
There's no actual statutory provision with the emergency furlough leave provisions. If you follow the normal sort of best practice, you would say reasonable time, but reasonable, if there was an announcement on a Friday, which the government has been so keen to do, you get a 5 o'clock announcement that says that your business can open on Monday, for example, then 2 days or so over the weekend, I think would be reasonable for most employers. I think, but you've got to temper that with common sense. If you're like when the building trade was able to go back at short notice, if you wanted to get a team of builders from Shropshire to Greater Manchester to resume work on a site. With all of the accommodation problems that there are, the fact they perhaps used to have 3 in a transit van, and now the guide says they have 2. Even 2 doesn't strike me as 2 meters, I might add, but
No.
you've got to make sure that you can conduct that safely. So I think in those cases, if an employee says I can't do that, maybe I've got a commitment on a Sunday evening, I can't get there, then you have to use your common sense. Yeah. So, but typically we've been writing letters, literally like that, emails and letters, phone call follow up. Great, you can be back to work on Monday, 2-3 days. Some employers have had the luxury of giving people a week's notice. It just depends on their own business needs.
Yeah. It needs to be a bit fluid as well, doesn't it? From both sides.
It does. Yeah. And we've had employers bringing staff back from furlough. They've done some work, they've completed orders, and then they've been put back on furlough after that. Yeah, just whatever's been necessary.
If you've got an employee that it can't return to work because of childcare, what are the options that the employer has at that point? It's obviously going to be a big issue coming up because the schools obviously aren't going to be open fully until September now. So we've got potentially, 4 months of juggling for a lot of working parents. So where do they stand if they don't want to carry on? Because they don't have to keep the employees on furlough, do they? But I mean, ideally you'd want them to.
Don't.
Yeah.
They don't have to keep them on furlough. These are unusual times, obviously. As a employment lawyer and as an employee relations advisor, especially if I'm speaking to an audience I don't know, I would counsel them strongly against anything that would constitute a dismissal at the moment. Ultimately, that's the employer's ultimate sanction. If somebody's in a role and they're not able to fulfill it, whether that's long-term sickness absence, whether that's childcare provisions or whatever, you as a business are going to end up terminating that person's employment. At the moment, I think that's a dangerous game because we're still at a stage where we haven't started the climbing out of the furlough provisions, the part-time opportunities that might arise. How could you be clear on what your resourcing requirements are going to be until really you're looking at the autumn? And at that point, you can make a safer decision. I think it's if somebody's in a role where they can't fulfill it because they can't physically attend work because they've got no childcare arrangements, they've got the protection of the regulations in terms of emergency dependence leave. You don't have to pay them. That's ultimately the situation. It's a case of your role's not furloughed. We need to find another solution for the short period. Either that person, if they can't work from home, if they have to attend but they can't, I think the reasonable employer is going to have to find a solution which might mean recruitment for temporary cover.
Okay.
Review it in a few months.
And this one so if you've got a member of staff who's refusing to come back as they're just happy to take their 80% pay, and I've seen this on a forum, they had a member of staff that was just happy playing Xbox all day on his Xbox rather than coming to work. What do you do in this situation? I presume can you start disciplinary proceedings or? Well,
if actually that was the clear evidence, if they admitted that, or if it was obvious from an investigation that was their sole reason, that was their reason, sure, they would be failing to follow a reasonable instruction. If their reason was, I'm scared, boss, then I would say, you can say, well, furlough's ended, I won't pay you if you won't come back to work. You'd share with that employee all of the risk assessments you've undertaken, all of the steps that you've taken to make the workplace safe or as safe as possible. on that basis, you could avoid paying them, and you certainly don't have to keep them on furlough.
Yeah.
But as I said before, I think it would be dangerous at the moment. You can't call it an irrational fear that somebody leaves their house, gets on public transport, goes to work. It's still far too early with the threat of a second wave and all the rest of it at the moment. I don't think you could say it was an irrational fear if you had good, clear evidence to show that simply that person doesn't want to work because they're enjoying furlough. Fine, but you could say that it's a case of summary dismissal. I think that'd be very dangerous because I'm sure that that's not what they would admit in the context of a dispute.
No. And I just think the problem is everybody's in a different boat, aren't they? And everybody has got different emotions and feelings about it. And as an employer, it's hard because not only are you trying to keep your business surviving and, cash flow, you're concerned about where your next money's coming in to pay your staff. You're just trying to desperately keep this sort of business that you've created from scratch in some instances going and coming out of it, and then you're having to consider all the emotional side of your employees and your employee well-being. It can be quite a lonely place to be, just to sort of, and a lot to think about, as well as trying to do the day job as well.
Yes.
So what I'm finding is lockdown has given business owners a real time to reflect on what their business is and where they want it to go. And a lot of people, I think, felt that they were on a hamster wheel, so to speak, just constantly. They'd built like a monster, like an albatross around their back in the of the business. And what they found is by stepping back and looking, they thought, well, actually, maybe if I did 70% of what I was doing before, but more profitably, I only actually need 30% of the staff, or if I streamline this, and actually thinking what they want out of the business. They don't want this huge monster. They want a more streamlined, systemized business that is more efficient and effective. And that isn't just taking on extra machinery or anything like this. Is just looking at what they're doing and what's manageable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and yes, as I say, that where businesses can show that they've got those thought processes, existing employment laws and best practice remain, and always have. And redundancy and restructure is perfectly permissible. And I've seen, especially in manufacturing, where I've had 2 or 3 clients who've expressed this. In the case of one company over in Lincolnshire, they'd found that after an initial problem with their supply chain, so they furloughed everybody for the first sort of 4 to 6 weeks, but then they were able to start bringing people back, and they realised that they're at the point now where they've got 50% or so of people back. They're actually at about 80% of their actual turnover and output, and they're realising actually that they can get more out of staff, undoubtedly. So I think businesses need to look at that, of course.
And also where I've been saying to the business owners, rightly or wrongly, is if you're going to definitely make redundancies, not because of the impact of COVID, but because you've identified this is the direction you want your business to go in now, to start this process early. Because for you as a business owner, if you start the process early and you get the tasks ticked off your list, you can move forward quicker. You haven't got the constant niggle in your brain that you've got to deal with the furloughed staff in 3 months' time. Also, as well as, this is just my opinion, if you let your staff know earlier, there's going to be a lot of redundancies when the furlough scheme ends. So actually, if you make your staff redundant earlier, they've got more chance of finding employment than those that are sat at home on furlough. And I might be wrong, but that's just where I kind of...
No, I think that's good advice, Carrie. I think that's good advice. You can, and as of probably been about a month now, ACAS confirmed their sort of COVID-19 guide on whether or not you could still continue with things like disciplinaries and grievances, and by implication redundancy consultation. So and the answer is yes. If they consent, you can use Zoom technology, for example, and you can crack on with consultation. And we're seeing it. We're seeing those announcements with the bigger employers, the really big employers, like Rolls-Royce announcing 3,000 job losses in the UK, that kind of thing. They're consulting now, and there's going to be there's going to be quite a lot of companies that maybe were thinking about this a year or two ago anyway.
Yeah.
They're going to use COVID-19 as not so much an excuse, but they're just going to sweep all the bad news in now. I think the city, their investors, the shareholders are going to be expecting it. So go ahead and do it now.
Yeah,
because I think get it in this financial year.
It benefits both ways as well, because the employers are off anxious about actually will they have a job at the end of the day, and it's just another worry. The employer needs to get on with it and move forward. So actually, it kind of benefits both parties, just rather than just using the furlough scheme as an excuse to kick it down the line. Get on with it. And
I would, maybe this sounds like it's a plug for my company, but we do, as well as provide employee relations advice, we do outplacement services, and there are some good technology available to provide some support to employees to help them prepare for the future, prepare for a state of transition, find those suitable alternative roles. Maybe a change of career direction for them. With CV writing software, job boards, but also a lot of self-help about and self-awareness around their personality, their skill sets, and I think transferable skills.
I think also if an employer can wrap that into the redundancy process as an introduction as well, it just helps with you're not parting on such bad terms either, are you? You can see that.
Yeah.
Not that you can ever part on good terms, but it just...
No. But I think if ever there was a time that employees would know that it was not hugely unfair, there's always that why me. But why at all will probably look a lot clearer.
Yeah.
And then acceptance there.
And then finally, one thing that's concerning my clients is during lockdown, employees have worked from home a lot, and they are anticipating there's going to be more requests from employees to work under a more flexible working arrangement, working from home long term. Now, some businesses that might suit, and the saving on the rent, the rates in offices.
Sure.
But there are some businesses that working from home arrangements, you're just not as efficient, and the efficiency of the business has dropped, and it just is better you're all in one place. So what implications would COVID-19 have had, and actually being able to have the ability to work from home have on any flexible working requests that might come as a result of this?
Well, again, flexible working, the policies are probably already in place with the employer. The employer is free to say no if it's in good faith. There isn't quite the same statutory mechanism that there once was, because the situation was the tribunal was never hearing any flexible working request denials as a claim in itself. It normally would form part of an argument for sex discrimination. But essentially, an employer, there's eight sort of grounds for an employer saying no, effectively. I suggest you don't choose all eight. Then you get yourself in a bit of a mix-up. But there's usually good reasons why an employer feels it can't be achievable. I think a lot of employers, though, are finding that it can be. I think we're in this bit of a state of transition at the moment. Depends on the nature of the work.
Yeah.
I think, yes, there's going to be huge pressure at the moment whilst this virus is with us, without any injections to see it go away anytime soon. There will be a considerable amount of expectation where staff have been working from home. It's a suck it and see one at the moment, Carrie. I think as a business, I think some businesses are finding that they are looking at operating in a different way. I was talking to one company recently. They're currently paying £70,000 a month in central London for rent to accommodate about 40 people.
Cool.
Prestigious offices, relatively short, they're tied in for 12 months. Prestigious offices so that their Japanese investors can fly in, but it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And at the moment, it's a business where people can work from home. I think it's just that kind of overhead. You think the impact that has on your ability or your resilience. You think, well, actually, that's a lot of bodies. Do we need that kind of accommodation facility?
I think there'll be more hybrid working arrangements coming out this way. There's still an
seeing
office.
that. We're seeing that already with those essential businesses. I mean, accountancy practices, a lot of accountants and law firms that have been open throughout, working from home, they've actually been trickling back staff, but they're typically saying come in suited and booted. Well, that's their intention in the coming weeks, that they want their staff in, visible, able to see clients in their suit and ties as they might expect, as opposed to scruffy t-shirts like me today, and looking the part and being available. But to ensure the social distancing, they perhaps reception services, they've dispensed with them entirely, and they just have a different way of working. So they're looking at their risk assessments and they're making sure that perhaps only a third of the workforce are in at the moment. And we'll see more of that. But I think that could easily be a permanent solution for a lot of professional services. Agile working has been, what my business has been all about, with my solicitor's hat on for the last 6 years for me. We rarely need to have face-to-face meetings. We use technology like this. I've got Microsoft Teams that I frequently use on a daily basis, but during lockdown. So there are other ways of doing it, but until you can go paperless, until you can dispense with big printer scanner copiers and the ability to churn out trial bundles or whatever your business sector is, you might need a base, but does it need to be quite the size and the drain on resources that it currently is?
I think there'll be a lot of offices downsizing. That's my sort of take on it. I might be wrong, but I think again, employers are thinking, actually, if I can save half my rent and my employers are happier and work more efficiently, then it's just a no-brainer. Well, that's all my questions I've got. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I just hope anyone watching this that have got employees and you're considering what you're struggling, Alasdair runs Human Results, we'll always be happy to help. And I just hope that covers some of the key questions people have got. So thank you.